A very good morning, class. Today we are continuing with our topic on settlement patterns. So we are now going to look at another model, which is the concentric model. Yesterday we looked at the other model, which is the multiple nuclei. So we also need to just have a slight recap on the multiple nuclei before we move on to another, so that we can actually draw the differences between these models. So as we open here, let's start looking at this. Like I always allude to in our lessons, these lessons are proudly sponsored by VT Africa together with their subsidiaries, which are Fibotech and Fastratech. They are also endorsed by the basic, the Department of Basic Education, DBE, and they are CAPS aligned. So you are rest assured that what you are learning now is something that is applicable in your curriculum, something that will be examinable in your examination. So let's look at the other. To participate in our assessments, you need to log into www.hellosmart.com. And then you sign up as a guest, and this is the ID number that you put where you are required to put an ID, which is 598751. Right, let's just revisit our vocabulary so that we don't forget what we are dealing with here. Right. Let's look at multiple nuclei. Right. This is the definition that we have. It is a model that was developed in 1945 by two people called Chauncey Hare and Edward Ullman. It is an economical model. In this model, it is suggested that land use zones develop around specific areas of activity depending on the needs of the land use zone. It was based on the city of Chicago. The city began with a CBD, but other smaller CBD, so we mean it began with a single CBD, but other smaller CBDs developed on the outskirts. So that's why it's called multi-nuclei or multiple nuclei. So this is the definition. Let's go back. Right, we're still here. We want to look at another word that make us remember what we are dealing with. Then the definition is the same here. It's saying, okay, the nuclei is actually a growth point. It is a place of development in a certain outlying area. Right, let's leave the definitions and go to the lesson of today that we are going to be dealing with. Right. Today, we are moving on to another model, which is called the modern American Western city. The modern American Western city is also called the concentric zone model, which was developed by a man called Burgess in the 1900s. It represents, or it used to represent, the structure of the modern American city. Why are we saying it used? It's because nowadays you are going to see when we look at the criticism why we say it used to, because there are other, like the one that we did yesterday, models that are actually preferable nowadays. So we say it's used to represent the structure of the modern American Western. This model represents land use patterns and developed in the 1900s and shows influence of improved transport, just like the one we were looking at yesterday. Though the transport was not that improved as the one that was developed in 1945. Land use zones develop in concentric circles or zones around CBD. The CBD is the center and is separated from the other land use zones. The modern American Western city model is similar to the multiple nuclei model in that the residential areas are separate from the residence workplaces. So that's where the difference is. So it is different from the multi-nuclei in that residential areas are separate from the residence workplaces. Whereas when you look at, let me just add a page here. Whereas when you look at the model that we were looking at, yes, you find that you will be having a CBD. Let me put a pen here. Right, you'll be having a CBD that is somewhere here, and then you have got other areas maybe of habitation and so forth, and you have got other outlying areas here that you have developed as OBDs, and you have got CBD here. So as you look at this one, you see that there will be also residential areas around the other OBD and this CBD, and close to this there will also be some residential areas. So these residential areas, as you look at them, then there will be some maybe industry here, and people will be living close to their residential areas. But opposed to that, you find that the concentric zone model, the people's residences are separate from their workplaces. Let's go back to our page. Right? So they are separated land use zones. Then we are saying here the residential areas are separate from their residence workplaces. That's very important. The most expensive properties are close to the CBD. That's the difference also from the multiple nuclei. The multiple nuclei model, you find that the most expensive residences are actually far from the city. Whereas in this one, you find that the most expensive are close to the on this one, most expensive properties are close to the CBD since the land is sought after. The concentric zone model, this is just a short definition here that we have a brief definition. Social groups are spaced in circular distances from the CBD based on their socio-economic status. Right, based on human ecology, the theory that was done by Burgess and applied on Chicago. So this theory that we're looking at now was actually done by Burgess, as we mentioned earlier on, and it was also applied on Chicago, just like the one we're doing. It was the first to give the explanation of distribution of social groups within urban areas. This concentric ring model depicts urban land usage in concentric rings. The Central Business District, or CBD, the CBD is in the middle of the model, and the city is expanded in rings with different land uses. It is effectively an urban version of Tom Tunnell's regional land use model developed a century earlier. So it was actually a revised version of another model that was developed that we are not looking at. It was developed by von Thunen. That was a century earlier. That was around in the 1800s. In rings with different, developed a century earlier. It influenced the later development of Homer Hoyt's. We are going to look at that, the Hoyt theory, which was done in 1939. And Harris and Ullmann's multiple nuclei, we dealt with this yesterday. The zones identified are, so what are the zones identified in this concentric zone model? We have got the center with the central business district, followed by the transition zone of mixed residential commercial uses or zone of transition. The outer ring is the working class residential homes, inner suburbs, in later decades called inner city or zone of independent working men's home. Followed by the better quality middle class homes, outer suburbs or zone of better housing. And the fifth one is what we call the commuter zone. The model is more detailed than the traditional down, mid, uptown divide, by which downtown is the city, uptown the affluent residential outer ring. Let's go on. Right. We do have criticisms to this model that was done by the later geographers and town planners who looked at the settlements and their patterns. The model has been challenged by many contemporary urban geographers. First, the model does well with cities outside the United States, in particular with those developed under different historical concepts. Even in the United States, because of changes such as advancement in transportation and information technology and transformation in global economy, cities are no longer organized with clear zones, and zones is put in quotes here, so that you find that you don't necessarily have a zone, an industrial zone, a residential zone. Any land as you move through the city can actually become a zone for something else. Where it used to be residential, you will find that it changes. It may that's when we talk of morphology. You find that it changes into something else. It becomes commercial. When it was residential, it becomes commercial. It's a commercial land use or industrial land use. It describes the peculiar American geography where inner city is poor, with suburbs with poor, while suburbs are wealthy. The converse is the modern elsewhere. Okay, the converse is the norm. I'm sorry about that. The converse is the norm elsewhere. It assumes an isotropic, plane, and even unchanging landscape. Physical features, land may restrict growth of certain sectors. Hills and water features may take some location unusually desirable residential purposes. Commuter villages defy the theory, being a distant part of the commuter zone. Decentralization of shops, manufacturing industry, and entertainment, urban regeneration and gentrification. More expensive property can be found in formerly low-class housing areas. We all know that even nowadays, when we put in our context of cities, you may find that you can find more expensive property in areas that used to be considered or that are considered low density or low class, like Soweto. You can find that there are now malls there. that are actually expensive spaces. Many new housing estates were built on the edges of cities in Britain. So that issue of saying the most expensive is actually in the city center, you find that it is defied by this fact that in countries like United Kingdom, Britain, more expensive housing estates were actually built on the peripheries of the cities. It does not address local urban politics and forces of globalization. The theory also does not fit the polycentric cities. For example, Stockholm. When we talk of polycentric cities, we are talking of cities that do not have one city center. So they have got many centers, just like the multi-nuclei model that we discussed yesterday. Now let's look at this diagram that describes or shows the Burgess model. In the inner center here, where we've got blue, you can see, and we've got our key here that tells us what is meant by the different rings. The center is the CBD, that is the Central Business District. The following outlying layer is the factories. Then the green one next to the factories, we've got the low class residential areas. Then the outer layer, the low class, we have the medium class residential, which is on the interwar period. Okay, let me see what is being transitional. The factories are transitional, and then the low class is the old inner city area, and then the medium class residential is the interwar period. These are the area that was built. When they say the interwar period, they mean somewhere between 1918 and 1939. If you know of what we call the Roaring 20s, when there was a lot of wealth that was amassed, that was actually followed by the Great Depression. So this is the area that the medium class residential area was actually built. So now on the outer skirts, we now have the high class residential, which are modern suburbs. Right, we do have a 3D image that shows our concentric model, and on the 3D, you find that the center here, which is number 1, this is the Central Business District. We have got the tall buildings, which is the most expensive land use or the most expensive property that we have according to this model. Then the second one in purple here, we have got the zone of transition, which is our industrial areas. Then we have a zone of independent workers' homes, which is number 3, which is here. So this is the zone of independent workers' homes. Then number 4, which is here. And where do we find it? Here. You find that we have got the zone of better residences. That is the medium class or the high class residences. That's where you find. And then 5, we have the zone, the commuter zone. So the more you move into the city, the more the price of the land appreciates. So the more you move up, the less the price. That is according to the model. Though we are going to see from some criticisms of this that, as we have seen, we actually saw it here. Let me come here. So as you see here on the criticisms, you see that that is not the norm in all the cities at the moment in the world. Then we want to move to another model, which is called, I know we're still on the modern American Western city. Residential densities are low with visible separation between people. We have explained this. Then the building density is the highest in the center, and lower zones move further away from the center. Low-income residential areas are close to the CBD because residences can't afford expensive transport costs. Now we want to move to the third world city. The sector or the Hoyt model, which was actually developed by Hoyt. It represents the third world city model. Land use zones develop in sectors along the traffic routes and radiate outward from the CBD position in the center. Why is it so? Why is the third world city positioned, or why are they positioned along the traffic routes? You may just put that question in your mind. Why in the third world? When you talk about third world, you know that we're talking the poor countries, the less industrialized countries. Why do the zones in sectors along traffic routes? Why is that so? Right, some of you could have answered, some of you could be somehow mistaken, but we all know that because of the poverty issues in the third world country, people don't afford transport. So because people struggle to travel from one place to another, and people want to settle where they are near the traffic routes, along the traffic routes where they can access the transport cheaper. So what happens is, from the traffic routes, you find that it radiates outwards from the CBD, which is positioned in the center. This model aims to explain land use patterns in developing countries and represents the structure of third world cities or cities in a less economically developed country, or LECD. So when you talk about these LECDs, we are talking about the less industrialized countries, which are economically disadvantaged. Large-scale rural-urban migration takes place because of opportunities in the urban areas, which in turn leads to both formal and large-scale informal settlements. So just a brief definition here. The Hoyt model describes zones which are extended outward by transportation such as railroads and highways. All right, let's look at this diagram that we have here that is describing the model. So the model looks like this. We do have the center, which is the CBD, and then the factories, as you can see, they are not actually going around like what we saw in the concentric, but it will be following a route. So it follows a route of transport, and then around that area, you find that now we have residential areas around those economic hubs or activity areas, economic activity areas. So we do have our industries here, the red one, but here we find that we have got low-class residential areas surrounding the industrial area. This is the pool or the source of the workers or the labor that actually works in those factories. So the green here is describing those low-class residential areas who will be living close, by the way, because they also can't afford the transport to their workplaces, so they have to live close by. And then immediately after the low class, we have the medium class residential, which is also what we call the interwar period, which developed mostly during those war years. And this is in paper. So you find that it's a bit outside the area, the factories, and so maybe because they are avoiding pollution and so forth, and they can afford to travel to and from the factories. So this is the medium, and then the high class residential area, it actually starts from the city center and it spans out further outside the city. So this is mostly, if you look at it, maybe because these are the people who can afford to buy, to purchase the land that is in the CBD area here, and then they can actually spring out to the further outskirts of the cities because they have, or they can afford the transportation to those other areas. This was just page, we don't need it. Let's look at this. Right. What do you mean by the third world city? When we talk of the third world city, we are looking at those cities that are found as described by the Hoyt model, that are found in the poor countries or in the less advanced countries. So there is a clear distinction in the living conditions of the upper and lower income classes. So the issue of the haves and the have-nots is actually clear here. The accommodation is separated according to the haves and the have-nots. You have got the poor accommodation sector or the poor residential areas, and then you have got the rich residential areas. It's separated from the others. Then the upper income residents tend to live closer to the CBD, and lower income residents live closer to the outskirts of the city. That's the difference with the multi-peronuclei model that we dealt with yesterday. In this regard, you find that it is actually the upper residents that tend to live closer to the city, and lower income residences live closer to the outskirts of the city. Commercial areas, in addition to the CBD, include bazaar type businesses. Low income residential areas are close to the CBD and industrial areas, while high income residential areas are away from industrial areas because these land uses are incompatible. Right. Let's now bring the whole issue of these models home. We are now looking at the South African city. How does the South African city fare compared to or based on the Hoyt model? So the South African city model is based on the Hoyt model, but was influenced by the apartheid policy. So we all know where South Africa is coming from. It is the policies that were there before 1990 were policies where there was apartness, which is called apartheid. So apartheid is apartness, which means people of different races were supposed to live apart. Even their business areas were supposed to be apart. So as you can see now, what actually influenced or what became the basis of the organization of the cities in South Africa is the Hoyt model, because of its very nature of dividing the poor and the rich. But this was actually further divided into the different races, not only on the poor and the rich people. So the Group Areas Act limited movement and freedom of choice of South Africans and residential areas in which they could live. This model considers the influence that urban segregation had on South African land use patterns. Buffer zones such as railway lines, major roads, rivers, or industrial areas were used to separate races and affected the land use structure. South Africa is undergoing transition due to democracy. So when you look at this, you find that that is actually being changed. That's what we mean by undergoing transition. This is being changed because this separation of people is no longer in, and you find that people are encouraged to live in harmony and to live together. So because of that, you find that the former impoverished areas that were impoverished because of this policy are now being developed, and they are also becoming industrial attraction centers. Right, the model of urban structure basing on the South African city. So this is the South African city, as you can see it here. It has a center, which is the CBD. And then next to the CBD, you find that we have got the middle white class, the low white class. Then just outside, we have a section that is for colored or Indian. Then we have industries in between. The industrial area here is actually, this industrial area here is actually dividing the colors from the Africans. And then we might have a major road, like this might be a major road, traffic route, which is dividing the African township from the low white township. Then we have a buffer zone, which could be just an undeveloped area, which is maybe just a bush, which could be just be a bush here, and then so it could be just be a bush here, and then this is dividing the African township from the colored or Indian township. And these lines are actually showing those boundaries here, the buffer zones. So this is also a buffer zone. So this is a buffer zone, as you can see. So this area is a buffer zone between the colored and then the middle income white group area on the other side. And then, as you can see, these are thin lines, which mean they are not very strict borders or buffer zones between the middle income and the high income white, but they are also separated. But you can see, because they are of the same race, there was no much division there, like these thick lines that you see between the people of different races. And then we have another one here, which is a middle income white area. So this is how it was or how it is, but there is a lot of change that is being implemented there. Let us look at. No, it's not taking us to where I wanted it to take us. Right. Right. Let's look at this mind map. I want to go to the zones and look at no, it's not looking nice here. I just have to just get out of this. Right. Let's move on. The changing urban patterns and land use in South African cities. As we said due to democracy, the art of democracy is actually a lot of change, and things are not the same anymore. So the main process is responsible for changing urban patterns and land use. We have decentralization, where commercial functions move to residential areas, movement of CBD functions outside the CBD. Deconcentration. So this decentralization, if you look at this, when people were doing shopping long ago, people knew that they just have to go to the inner city Joburg and buy from the shops there. But nowadays, if you look at the outlying area in the cities in Johannesburg, for example, you can see that we've got those commercial functions being taken to the people in those residential areas. So you have malls that are constructed in the residential areas, and people now are actually buying in their residential areas, and they don't have to travel to the CBDs. Then we have deconcentration. Central concentrated areas become saturated and transfer or move some of their functions to the periphery. Re-centralization. Centralization takes place in an area beyond the periphery to form a new area, to form a new center area. Because of these processes, urban patterns and land use in South African cities change for several reasons. Let us look at some of those reasons. Right. Urban renewal, urban structure and patterns, changing urban patterns and land use in South African cities. We have urban renewal. Centrifugal forces cause depopulation of the CBD, resulting in the decline of inner city centers, which show degeneration and urban blight and decay. As a result, urban renewal projects developed to encourage people to move back into the CBD. Then renewal projects include the renovation and redevelopment of deteriorated urban areas to make them attractive and welcoming. In this way, urban renewal can change land use patterns of areas. A revival of city centers take place through what we call facadism or gentrification. You can look at these definitions here to see what is meant by that. When we talk of facadism, we mean keeping the external front of a building, but modifying the rest of the building. So you keep the external front of a building, but you modify the rest of the building. Then gentrification is upgrading and renovating rundown areas in the inner city. What do we mean by urban blight? A previously functioning city falls into disrepair and degeneration. Then urban decay is just another word for urban blight. Then degeneration, decline or degeneration. Centrifugal forces, these are forces that pull people apart. So those centrifugal forces, you find that is because of the crime levels in the city, and like what happened, the story of Hillbrow, the story of Yeovil and so forth. You find that many people actually had to run away from those places, they to leave those places to go and find other places to live, like newly sprung areas like these bond houses in the old residential areas like Soweto, Cosmos City and so forth. And people live because there are so many issues there. You've got issues of crime, you've got issues of deteriorating infrastructures there, the buildings and so forth, dilapidation of buildings, and so people move. Then let's look at other factors here, invasion and succession. Invasion and succession is when one appropriate land use is replaced by another more appropriate land use, such as from residential to commercial. So if a residential area is going to change to commercial, that is actually an invasion or succession. The former land use is being replaced by another land use. A new activity invades and takes over an inappropriate land use area and makes it successful once more. Then gated communities. Residential areas are created for secure housing estates with restricted access to residents and visitors. The areas are fenced off and have controlled access. Gated communities are created to provide residents with security and safety. So before we end this lesson, we just want to look at just one or two questions. Right, let's just look at question 7, which is referring to the Hoyt. Right, the model of urban structure shown is, I've already given you the answer here. Right, but the name that I gave you, so this is here is the Hoyt model, but there is an actual name. What is it? Third world city model, multiple nuclei model, South African city model, the modern American Western city. So let's just figure out what is the answer that we have to give there. Right, let's go to our pull out. So according to this, as we said earlier on in our lesson, we're actually saying the Hoyt model refers to the third world. So it is the third world city model. And then we need to look at yet another another question that pertains to what we did today. We have got question number 10 that deals with, right? It says the model of urban structure is shown is third world city model, multiple nuclei model, South African city model. What is this? So what you need to do here you look at the issues, if there are something to do with race, and you look at this middle white and water, then you will know what we are talking about. I hope we've managed to figure out what is the answer to this question. The model of this urban structure is called, so we talked about race issues here, that when you see race issues, you see that is written white, is written black, colored, and what have you, and there are buffer zones. So obviously this refers to South. So the answer, the correct answer here is C, which is the South African model. Then we may just attempt to do this. Let's hope it will connect, because that's where you have to use your connectivity that we gave the details on the smart lab. Unfortunately, that one couldn't. Students, I'm very elated to have you in this lesson, and I want to thank you so much for being such good students and listening and doing the activities with me. Thank you very much. We are going to meet again tomorrow exactly at 12 o'clock. So until then, keep studying and aim for the distinctions. Thank you.